You can't really talk about Trump without talking about human nature. So Trump really is irrelevant. And you can't talk about human nature without two very, very important branches as well as fractions that took place in the West. It's easy to react to the election results. All of us in this class have biases. That's what experiences do. Since you're sitting in a classroom and we happen to occupy a rather privileged position, we can sit back and talk about ideas in a relatively objective way. It doesn't mean that the pain and the hurts or the wounds will go away, but understanding at any level, I think, is helpful to some extent. So you have the West from the 3rd century all the way to the 13th century being a Christian nation for the most part. Everything is under the domination of Christian doctrine. And really, what is the teachings of Christ? The kingdom of God lives inside us. We've been expelled from the Garden of Eden. There is a way to get back, accept the teachings of Christ. And you do this for one simple reason. There is this battle between the body, or the passions, and the spirit. And down here, all that our bodies or our secular desires, whatever it is that you want to build will be built on sand, and eventually they're going to fall apart. So why waste time? Why waste energy? Why waste life? As Socrates would say, we should have some shame and invest in our souls rather than in our flesh. But there is an assumption here that human beings do in fact have a soul, and human beings are in fact kind and compassionate and forgiving. That in fact there is a way for us to cleanse the world in which we live, the world of body, the world of physicality, the world of politics. And as parents, we know that if you forgive your kids all the time, they'll turn out to be rotten. So once in a while, you slap them, you scream at them. So remember, from the 3rd century all the way to the 13th century, what you have is the domination of Christian philosophy and theology, all with the assumption that something deep within is really noble and good. When the 14th century comes about, something very interesting happens. You have some events, but the most important is the bubonic plague, or Black Death, around the 14th century, that puts the nobility of human beings and the compassion and forgiving, puts everything under question. And for the first time, something really interesting happens to the way we begin to look at life. We no longer try to live according to the laws of God, but we try to live according to the laws of man, or human beings. We are now at the very center of the universe. No one really is interested in understanding the mind of God and how it works and why things happen the way they do. And we assume that God's hands are involved in things. 14th century comes about and cracks begin to appear. And out of this crack, you have this beautiful mind. And by the way, this is a time where we call the Renaissance, the new birth. And it's just our perception of things have changed now, that eventually contaminates or builds America, really, and the way we think in the 21st century. Around the 16th century, there is a man who used to work for the Medici family. And for those of you who may not know, the Medicis are the family who kind of gave birth to the banking system. They were very powerful, but they were toppled, they had to escape. And there was a guy who used to work for them. His name was Machiavelli. And the reason why I think talking about Machiavelli today is important is because of the election results. Imagine for a moment that you're dating an alcoholic. You don't know they're an alcoholic, but then little by little you come to realize that they are in fact one. But you're a church-going person, and initially, once you realize that they drink a bit too much, you assume, you create this narrative inside your own head that if I was to take him to church, if we were going to read the Bible together, if we went hiking, maybe I can help him through rehab. And then you realize that doesn't work. And every time he drinks and he becomes somewhat abusive, whether physically or verbally or emotionally, and every time you want to fight back, all of a sudden you remember this verse from one of the Gospels. First, forgive, for they know not what they do. He's drunk, intoxicated. The evil spirits have consumed him, so he doesn't know what he's doing. Forgive him. Second, whenever you get slapped, turn the other cheek. it works for you. And it makes you feel as if you are very close to being like a Jesus Christ for your companion. And every time you want to slap back, you remember the Gospel of Luke, those who pick up the sword shall perish by the sword. So you say, no, I'm just going to take the abuse, but I'm not going to fight back. I'm just going to continuously turn the other cheek. And you do this over and over and over again, partly because you believe in compassion, you believe in forgiveness, and you have some religious sentiments deep within that the greatest rewards are reserved for those who suffer in silence. Consider the Gospel of Matthew, the Beatitude. Blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek. But then as the abuse continues, you realize something really interesting. You're tired of your face being black and blue. You're tired of the verbal abuse. You're tired of the emotional abuse. And you do something really, really amazing. You turn your back to God, and you turn your back to all the religious teachings, and you turn your back to compassion and to forgiveness. And you realize you are not immortal, and you don't have eternality. Your life is limited. You actually do experience pain, and it's real. So there comes a point when he comes home and he's about to drink. Maybe he does. And this time you won't forgive. This time you won't show compassion. This time the only person you care about is not God and the way he or she may look at you, observe you. You don't even care about your parents. You don't, like Noah. The only person that you care for is you and your kids and your body and your sanity. And all of a sudden you realize what you're practicing now is secular philosophy. It's your body and it's your life, and you only have one of them. So you pack up your stuff, you give him the middle finger, and you leave. And you get yourself a nice little apartment, and you realize he comes begging for forgiveness. But you've been there, you've done that. You refuse to forgive. He comes back again, knocks on the door, and you do something really interesting. Even though you're faithful to the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not lie, you in fact do lie. You say, I'm seeing someone. In fact, his name is Mike Tyson, sitting on the sofa. Should I call him to the door? Would you like to have a chat with him? And all of a sudden, this old companion of yours has 2 legs, borrows 2 more, and runs away very, 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 very quickly. How do you survive life? Power. Why are you here? Power. You want to graduate because you want power. Degrees will give you power. You will begin to think better. And when you're being interviewed, you can use language differently. And you will make an impression on the 8 people sitting on the panel looking at you, asking you questions, listening to what you're saying and how you're saying it. You want to live in a gated community. I'm not talking about living somewhere in downtown Oakland, going to Home Depot, buying some bars and nailing them to the windows and the doors. Gated community. You want to go to Montclair, right? You want to drive through Snake Road and you see all these mansions, 50 houses in a gated community. The poor are not allowed. The homeless are not allowed. And there are securities everywhere. Power. Not a single one of us in this class can survive life without power and without lying. It's impossible. Some of your writings are just not even worth shit. But I give you a grade. You even know yourself that it's nonsense, what you've written. Your questions, your essay. And I don't give you a C because I like you. And I don't tell that you have no idea. I don't tell you that you have no idea what you're writing about. I give you a C because I understand the difficulties of life. So I allow you to continue lying to yourself and to me. And I won't push that into your face because I don't want to embarrass you. Remove God from the picture. What do you have? You're talking about 14th century and after, where you're not talking about God-centered morality, but human-centered morality. Now, let me say a couple of things about religion and how it brings people together. And let me also say a couple of things about what happens when you get rid of religion. And then you allow the selfishness that's inherent in us. In other words, all of us in this class are selfish. We are selfish because we want to continue with our lives. You want to breathe. You want to have a roof over your head. You want your belly to be full. Pride allows all of us to be selfish. But this particular aspect of pride from the 14th century onwards is that pride is no longer barricaded by religious teachings. You're here for you and for you alone. And other people are like vultures, predators. If you have any goods, they will take. If you're wondering why in the 21st century all of us are here just for ourselves, there is a history behind it. There was a time the elements of shame and guilt and repentance, which had religious tones, it would connect us together in some shape or form, but now that's gone. And since the Renaissance, everything has been human-centered. How do you see other people? How do you see power? How do you see success? How do you see happiness? And this is where Niccolo Machiavelli comes in. For those of you who may not like Trump, and yeah, there isn't much to like about this man, but he is the embodiment of Machiavellian philosophy. He is the prince who will do anything and will say anything to gain power. There was this woman on YouTube. First, she shows her face to us without any makeup on. And man, she's ugly. And then little by little, she starts putting stuff on her face. And man, she looks better than Beyonce. And while I'm sitting and spending or wasting 20 minutes of my life looking at this transformation, all of a sudden my imagination kicks in. And I say to myself, the poor man who will date her and then wake up next to her in the morning, is he going to be in complete shock the way you and I were when we found out that Trump won the election? And the answer is yes. How did she win over loneliness? Makeup. Lie. How could she go home with a man? Well, she sweet-talked him. She appealed to the lowest part of what makes him a man, sex. It's all a lie, but it works. It gives her attention. None of us in this class have knowledge of anything in depth, but we have a collection of assumptions that we mistake for knowledge. And what do we do with those assumptions? We forcefully feed them to other people, impose them on other people. And just in case you have power, charisma, magnetism, other people will buy what you give them. Ever seen Donald Trump say, "I'm sorry," about anything? Because that's not what Machiavellian prince does. What's the difference between Trump and Clinton? Clinton went to his wife and said, "I'm sorry." Went to his daughter, said, "I'm sorry." He had this thing called either human ethics or religious ethics that made him feel guilty. And that guilt moved him to repentance, remorse, guilt, confession ultimately. Not Trump. Why? Because he is the embodiment of the philosophy of Prince. Every semester, at the very beginning of the term, you know what I want to do? About 9:05, 5 minutes after my classes, I want to lock the door. Gun violence. Oakland is oftentimes in chaos. And why do I do that? I've been here for 20 some odd years, never happened in my classes. Fear. If I was excessively in love with my students and I trusted them and I had faith in them, they will never do wrong, I would do this, leave the door open, unlocked. And just by chance, you may have some nut job coming into the classroom, being angry for some strange reason. And it's been happened before around the country. Laney is no exception. It could happen here. What is it that a Trump or a prince must do to hold on to his power? And just in case he doesn't have any power, how can he gain power? When my parents came here and they bought the car wash, every week or so we went to the bank to deposit the quarters. And I remember there was this really nice, kind, stupid Caucasian woman. She looks at us and she says, "Why do you guys come here and take our jobs?" And my brother and I had to remind her that we wash cars. And in 1985, we actually checked to see what is the lowest of jobs, the least honorable job you could ever have in the US. And lo and behold, it was washing cars. How do you make one group of people hate another group of people? You dehumanize them, demonize them. And just in case people don't fear them, keep advertising. Immigrants, Haitians, cats, dogs, rats, snakes. Keep telling people. Eventually, what used to be a lie becomes a truth. We are by nature afraid of life. Your presence in this class is an indication of that. We are by nature afraid of loneliness. Going on dating apps, going to parties, it's an indication of that. We are afraid of dying alone, perhaps. That's why we have companionship. That's why we have marriage. God forbid. That's why we have children. Now, we may not know any of this consciously, being aware of them, but they are in us. There are two things that you really, really need to have if you want to keep your power, whatever that power may be at whatever degree. You need to be two very, very, very vicious animals. You need to be a lion and you need to be a fox. Find the weakness in people, and that's not very difficult. For those of us who have kids, we do it really, really well. Do your homework, otherwise no TV time. How many of you really were thinking about inflation? Well, all of a sudden you realize the price of milk jumped from like $3 to $4.50, and that bothered you? Of course not. We don't really care about money. You pay $5 for a cup of coffee. This is not a culture that cares about anything, really. But you keep speaking this message. Our price is going up, and eventually people will buy it. Why? Because you've learned the art of cunningness. Why do you live in a studio and not a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom or a 3-bedroom? In fact, why don't you have your own house? Why are you renting? I'll tell you why. Immigrants. And keep shoving that narrative people's psyche. Who doesn't want a house? Who doesn't want the stability and comfort that comes with having a house? And who, in this day and age, doesn't feel that life has robbed them of opportunities? But the prince doesn't say it's the doings of God or Satan. A good, cunning prince will say, you don't have a house because of immigrants. You don't have a job because of immigrants. And do you know why foxes can be so cunning and can win? Because human beings are intellectually slothful. It doesn't pay to be aware, but it pays to be lazy. And what do lions do? Lions devour the enemy. Lions devour the sheep. Any of you in this class know whether or not Moses was hanged? Maybe he was shot? No. Moses just walked away from the whole thing. When Moses realized that the Roman or the Egyptian army is chasing after them, what did he do? Exercise compassion, forgiveness? No. He was a lion. He drowned them. What happened when he went? He goes up this mountain, disappears for a couple of hours, comes down with the tablets and then commandments, which he really stole from King Hammurabi some centuries ago, some plagiarism there. He comes down and sees what? That his people, the people that he rescued just a couple of days ago, they're worshiping a cow. What does he do? Forgive them? No, he destroys them. That's what lions do. He doesn't forgive them. He doesn't turn the other cheek. Again, for those of you, again, in this class who don't like Trump, you shouldn't blame him. You shouldn't even dislike him, really. Most of us hide behind this facade of nicety, that we are nice and kind and compassionate. And we only do that because we are poor. Some of you may not like me, but you need this class, and that makes you poor. Some of you may decide that, well, you know, I'm not going to do any work, I'm not going to show up to class very often. Well, that's going to delay your graduation. You'll be poor in another way.